series. I think many of you have been on for multiple sessions of this. But I'm delighted to have a very important topic that we've been wanting to cover in this series, and glad to have it covered today. The topic of metrics, Agile metrics. As you know, in the Agile software development environment, teams often struggle how the metrics have evolved, what metrics they should be measuring, and what are the right ones in the Agile world. And so this session is going to examine some of the common and some not so common metrics and introduce the concept of evidence-based management. And I'll let Don, when he covers this topic, go into more details and help that allow us to measure business goals and help them align with software development efforts, so you can be a lot more proactive about and use the right metrics. For presenter, we have Don McGreal. Don has been a regular presenter in this series, and I'm glad that we got him to cover this topic this month. In his role, Don is a VP of Learning Solutions at Improving Enterprises, and in that role, he's a hands-on Agile consultant and instructor. He specializes in Agile coaching at enterprise and team levels within larger organizations, and he is a Scrum.org Professional Scrum Trainer and has authored and taught a number of classes and trained thousands of software professionals around the globe. He's also co-founder of TastyCupcakes.org, which is a comprehensive collection of games and exercises for accelerating adoption of Agile principles. I'm sure many of you have tried many games from there. With that, let me turn it over to Don. Before I do that, Don, let me just quickly go over the mechanics of today's session, which is same like we do every time. We will have 45 minutes or so of presentation, and we'll take some questions that need to be taken along the way. So you guys feel free in the audience to add your questions in the Q&A panel, and I'll play the moderator role for those questions. I'm Hemant Salhans, by the way. And then towards the end, we will still leave another 10-15 minutes to take any bigger questions that make more sense to be covered at the end. And then we'll make the presentation and the recording available also to the audience. So with that, over to you, Don.
Okay, thanks, Hemant. Thanks for inviting me back. And yeah, this is an interesting topic. I find this one that I've been talking about more and more and applying and seeing more of a need over the past few years, and especially in my role. And hopefully you will see benefits too. So if you have any questions along the way, make sure you type them in there. Hemant will get to them at the end. And also feel free to contact me afterwards if you didn't get your question out there, or if you wanted a little bit more in depth. Feel free to contact me, Twitter, LinkedIn, email, whatever. However you'd like to, I'd be happy to engage in a discussion afterwards. So let's get started. This is the plan for the next 40-45 minutes or so. We will talk about the different types of metrics that are out there. This is a popular one where so what I'm going to attempt to do here is just sort of categorize metrics into two buckets. And none are necessarily bad, but they are often used for the wrong reasons. And that's what we're going to try to outline in that first part. And then in the second, talk a little bit about what are some of the problems with it. When we start to gather metrics, what might we have to look out for? And then tie it back to software development. And we're going to talk about metrics in general at first. Touch on software a little bit, but just these are problems that happen with metrics in general. So we'll tie it back to software development, why we need them, why it might be different in software development than a lot of other organizations. And finally, I want to tie it back to this concept of evidence-based management. This comes from the medical industry with evidence-based medicine. So we're going to be using some of the terminology and some of the approaches that have been used in some of these other industries when doing this. And we can talk a little bit about how this applies to organizations as well. And then, like Hemant said, we'll have some questions at the end. Excuse me. So let's get started. I want you to take just a second or two, and I want you to think about how you measure progress on your software projects. What types of metrics do you cover? And just think about that for 1 second. I want you to actually think about what do you use? What do you use to measure? Well, I take a drink here. And often what we get from this, when I ask this question, I do this a lot for live audiences, and I do talks and in my classes, we cover this quite a bit. and you get some very popular ones like like velocity or maybe tests pass or features completed and those types of things, which are good metrics. And that's often seen how we measure progress, right? We've got this many points done out of a total of this many. So these are very common metrics that we look at. But then I also like to ask, well, what about value? How do you measure value? If these are if this is as far as we go, what does that mean to your customer, to your business? Think about your customer sitting there wondering about how things are going, and you come back with, well, we've got 200 points out of 346 done. Aren't we great? What does that really mean for the customer? It sounds good, but where's their stuff? How are they actually getting value out of it? So there's been a lot of attempts to measure value over the time, relative sizing for value and other things. But this has been one of the main core problems in our software development world and in the Agile world. We've been struggling with this for a while. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that as we go. Let's define value and look at the metrics that can do that. So let's start there. Why don't we define value? Right out of the dictionary, it says it's the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And I think there's two parts to this. The more you pay for it, the less that value is. So it kind of comes down to, if you think about it, your return on investment. A drink of Coke might have a certain amount of value for me, but once there's a certain price point where it's no longer valuable to me if I'm going to pay too much money for it. So if you think about value itself, this is kind of how we're going to describe it. So what is the value of it? Now, if you bring it to software or your organizations, I want to go a little bit further here. I want to make it a little bit more of a bold statement. For companies, it is always presented in terms of money. It's profit derived from the use of a product or service. For each of you out there and the organizations and the projects you're working on, it wouldn't take too many. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to figure out, okay, with the stuff we're doing, how does that relate back to revenue and profit and cost or cost reduction, right? This is why we're doing it, and this is something I just want to make clear out there. It may not be an easy thing to measure, revenue, and the effect that we have on revenue or cost reduction and profit may not be obvious, and we may need some other metrics in between. But these tend to be lagging indicators. But this is why we're doing it, and we need to remember this. Even nonprofit companies, right? The big part of this is generating money so that they can do good out there in the world into society, but also reducing costs. So every one of the products we're working on comes down to this. If you're working at a company or an organization. If you're working on your own little things for fun, obviously that might be a little bit different. But for companies, like most of us are working for, this is what we're doing. So let's start there. That's value. And let's do a little bit of an exercise. I'm going to try to do this in webinar fashion. I usually do this in person, but I think it can work. Imagine all of you out there work for a pizza chain. So it's a smaller pizza chain, but they have a few stores in your city, spread around your city, maybe 5 or 6 different stores. They're great pizza. And but you all right now work for the delivery part of the organization of this pizza store. That means you have processes and you have mechanics, you have roles, you have managers, you have order takers, you have pizza delivery drivers. There's a group of people in a whole department that focuses on getting those pizzas out to customers, and that's who you work for right now. And now, along the way, you're going to want to measure how well you do, what your progress is, and these are things you can report back. But more importantly, this is how you're going to improve. You're going to want to look at these things. Hopefully, they're indicators that can show you certain things, show trends. That kind of thing. But you're focused on delivering. So as a pizza delivery organization, on the delivery side of it, what types of metrics would you want to measure? So think about this for a little bit, just a few seconds here. Think about what would you even want to measure? I've been doing this exercise a lot, and I've kind of compiled a lot of the ones that I get out there. So hopefully what you've been thinking show up here as well. Things like pizzas delivered per trip, right? We probably, you would think, want to maximize that. More pizzas we can deliver per trip, the better we're doing. How much time how much time it takes to take an order. Time for delivery, how much time we're going out there to deliver, how many miles, how much fuel is used, accuracy of the order, whether it's correct or not, route efficiency. You know, we could do little activities and exercises on how to get to places the most efficient way possible. You know, I think UPS has that policy of they only take right-hand turns, no left-hand turns. You know, things like that we could play around with. Orders per delivery orders per driver from a driver's side. Sometimes I haven't put it in here, but a number of incidents or accidents, citations. These are all things that you might want to measure on the delivery thing, and they all seem perfectly reasonable. So we list them out. You can probably think of a few others. There's a bunch of them, but these are some main ones. Now what I want you to do is take off your delivery organization side, your delivery side of things. Now, all of you out there work for the actual, or you're the owners of this pizza place. You own it. You're part owners. You have shares in it. You're really focused on the actual business itself. So put those hats on. Now think of what metrics you want to measure. Do they look much like the ones on the left? A lot of times when I do this, it doesn't take much that we come up with a completely different set of metrics every time. There are usually a couple, 2, 3, whatever that cross over, but it's very easy to come up with a pile of metrics on the right-hand side, just like it was for the left-hand side, simply by wearing 2 different hats. Delivery focuses on those things, but the owners are going to focus on other things, and you're probably already thinking about these things like, obviously, one would be revenue. And your costs as well. Customer satisfaction, and I get customer satisfaction on the left-hand side quite a bit too. Repeat customers, who's coming back. The actual employees, believe it or not, these owners, they do care about their employee satisfaction, you know, from a turnover standpoint and efficiency and performance and training and all that. They care about that, so they want to measure that stuff. Growth of the chain. What is it year on year, quarter after quarter? What's our growth look like? That sometimes being able to show growth is more important than just revenue by itself, obviously. Market drivers and trends. They're going to be looking at outside there at the market. What are the latest and greatest crazes out there for pizza? Vegetarian pizzas, gluten-free pizzas. What's next, right? Market share as well. Out of all the pizza chains in our city, what's our market share? How much do we make out of that? That's an important one that they look at. Real estate, too. Where should we be moving in? I guess that's part of market drivers and trends as well, is where should we be moving to next? So you see that there is quite a bit of a difference between these two. And if I were to ask you which ones focus on value more, which one do you think would be more value-focused? You're probably thinking of the right? The things on the left are fine, but do they really determine value? Like, you know, how much fuel used and miles per delivery. So we could probably assume that the more that the fuel used goes down, that the better our investments and costs are, right? We've got less costs. But is that really the measure of value, that this is good? It could be many other reasons as well, right? It could be that we're just using different types of cars, or we're not driving as many, we're not doing as many deliveries. We've got more people walking in. So there's lots of different things. So what we're going to do is we're going to refer to the ones on the left for the purpose of this and the rest of this presentation as circumstantial. This is circumstantial evidence of value. And the things on the right are more direct. And you could argue they all sort of float in there, but by and large, the things on the left are circumstantial, the things on the right are direct evidence. And you can sort of see where this might be going when it comes to evidence-based management. We're looking at circumstantial things are just, they're signs that we could be trending a certain way. But direct really are closer measurements of value along the way. So this is how we're going to define them going forward. So circumstantial versus direct. And we'll talk about the differences and what this all means here in a sec. So let's switch a little bit from pizza. We'll come back to pizza. But we're going to switch and now talk about software. How does it look any different? Can you do the same activity? And I like kind of the term of pizza delivery because it sort of works with software delivery as well. If you're on the delivery part of an organization, what metrics are you going to want to measure? This is where you end up with things like velocity or number of tests, code coverage, defects, things like code complexity through coupling and cohesion, how many build failures we've had. Process adherence is a big one as well. How many of our teams are doing Scrum properly? How many are doing Kanban? What percentage have gone through training? How many are using user stories? And that sort of thing. Can we measure the actual use of these agile practices that we're talking about? So these are all common ones that we use in our world. So code coverage, just to be more specific, this is from mostly on the unit testing side, but how many of our tests is our code covered through tests? What percentage of our code is covered through tests? Velocity, as well as how much work we're able to do within a given sprint. So there's different ways of looking at that. And these are very common. But then on the right-hand side, let's say you owned the software that you're using. What kind of metrics would you be looking at? And a lot of times it comes to a lot like what we're dealing with on the pizza side, revenue. Revenue per every release that we put out there, what revenue we're getting back, or per employee, right? Revenue could be going up, but we're hiring more people. It doesn't really help. So that's a common one as well. Investments, cost, customer employee satisfaction, just like the pizza place. Also, lead and cycle time. Right? How much time? But when our customer asks for something, how long does it take to actually get it to them, so it's actually being used? Innovation rate's interesting. We might be talking a little bit more about that later. It'll come back. But this is simply a way of measuring how much of what we do is new. New requests and new features or new products that our customers are demanding, versus maintenance. What percentage of our budget are we putting towards maintenance stuff versus new things?
John, can we take a couple of questions which I think might be appropriate to take along the flow?
Yeah, absolutely.
One is a question around your left side metrics. What is coupling? You can describe that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I glossed over some of these. I didn't want to get too much into these, but coupling is honestly more of a technical term, right? This is from a programming pieces. It could be between systems or within a system. How coupled is it means how dependent is it on other systems, and you can actually measure this stuff. If we were to move this system away, is it going to break because it doesn't have these other systems that it's dependent on? And you can look at internally the systems, the different components of a system. A highly coupled system is considered fragile, not very maintainable, or more complex. And it's very hard to work in because anytime you make a change, you break something else if it's highly coupled. So you can measure that, and there's a way of looking at that.
Okay, so there's a concrete software metric to assess coupling within it.
Yes, yeah, you can measure number of incoming dependencies versus outgoing, and it gives you sort of a ratio of that as well, outgoing. And yeah, there are ways of measuring that. And cohesion kind of goes hand in hand with that, because the better coupled it is, then the more cohesion you lose. So cohesion means how much do you stick to a certain responsibility. This goes to like having components having a single responsibility. When it's doing too many things, it adds also to complexity. So is there a very clear place in your system to go to figure one piece of the system out, or is everything jumbled together? And that's a measure of cohesion.
Got it. The second question, which is a little bit bigger, and you can reserve the right to postpone towards the end, is this question around why even discuss metric, which is what's the objective function for any metric? So what decisions are you going to make based on whether they're delivery metric or owner metric? So isn't that a first more kind of a primary question, which is what are we going to do with the metric before we?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's kind of what we're leading to here in this next little section. We're going to talk a little bit about what the values of those are, but yeah, why do we want to actually measure this stuff? What's the point, right? Could it have bad consequences? Absolutely. I'm going to push it off to the next one, because we're going to have three sections coming up, three parts that we want to make people aware of that where these can help or hinder you as well. So, but the long and the short of it is how do we know we're doing we're doing okay, right? How do we know things are going well? And do the people doing it on the delivery side actually understand why we're doing this in the first place? And metrics are something that can help us with that. But I really hope to answer that question in the next, the next few minutes, or I guess during this whole session. And if I don't, feel free to hit me up again at the end of the session with the question period.
All right.
Awesome, good. So yeah, these are just some common ones, right? So we'll go into a little bit more detail on some of these. I guess the customer usage one was just to show you a little bit about that is what parts of your system are they actually using? Do they even use it? When you make a release, how do you know they're actually using that piece? If they're not, are you getting any value out of it? And why aren't they using it? So those types of things and drawing attention to them really are more direct, right, rather than circumstantial. So I'm going to use this same term again, circumstantial and direct, left and right, when it comes to the software as well. We're going to call the ones on the left circumstantial evidence. If velocity is going up, does that mean that we're doing better as a team, as a product? Maybe. It sounds good, but we're going to want to depend more on the direct evidence than the circumstantial to find out why or what's going on. Good. So yeah, so this kind of comes down to this, right? So why? So what? Who cares, right? Well, here are the three challenges that we see with these. If we're not focused on the things on the right, the direct things, and more focused on the things on the left, like so often of our teams are, so what? Well, this is what this next piece is going to be. Is going to be talking about these three different parts that we're going to draw attention to here. So the first one is efficiency. So number one, efficiency. If we're not looking at the true metrics, the true value that we're bringing to our customers, and we're focused more on circumstantial ones, we're kind of a step away from why we're doing this. And with the more you measure these things, the more you look at them, the less obvious it is. The reasons that you're building this are a lot less obvious. There's this. Some of you may have heard this term before, cargo cults, and you can look it up. There's a Wikipedia page on it, and these are real images from it. And the story goes, in World War II in the South Pacific, the U.S. Found an island that was quite strategic for them, and but on that island there were a lot of natives that had been completely isolated for nobody knows how long, just hundreds and hundreds of years. They've been completely isolated from the outside world. But in comes this American military, and they build a base, like a runway, and they have planes coming in, landing, taking off. And the other thing they do a lot of is they drop supplies on the island, right? The runway wasn't big enough for all the bigger planes, so they would drop supplies on the island. And often the natives would get to the supplies before the military did. Now, the supplies were generally pretty, they're just basically food, right? So they'd open up these supplies and they'd get Coca-Cola and M&Ms and Twinkies and things like that, and they thought, wow, this stuff is amazing. And they'd get to them after these supplies were parachuted down. Well, after the war, the U.S. military cleaned everything up. They got out of there, and it was about 30 years later when researchers went back to that island, and what they found was, these are pictures from then, that the natives had reproduced what they saw. The planes, the runways, they were marching. A whole kind of religion had built up around what they saw back then. And these are generations later. Like, these are some of the people, most of the people weren't even around when this was happening back then. And why do you suppose they were doing it? Probably guess that what they were thinking is, by reproducing everything they saw back then, that the gods would send them more Coca-Cola and Twinkies from the sky. And so it became quickly about all these ceremonies instead. And that's what we're getting at. This is what we see when we focus too much on the circumstantial evidence. If we focus on process and not the value, if we focus on increasing velocity, then a lot of the work that you do is going to be wasteful work. Things just because it's what we said we would do. And that affects efficiency. We're not as productive. We're not thinking as much around what we're working on. And I worked on 10 years ago when I was on a rationally unified process project. so much of it was about that process adherence where we said every iteration we're going to do these things, and one of them was to do a design. And every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of every iteration was we would do design. And it just kind of became this sort of robot thing where we would go in and do a design for that iteration, whether we needed to or not. And I remember thinking, you know, we were just doing some simple database calls one iteration. It wasn't that complex. But we needed to check it off. We needed to check off that we had the right UML design artifacts and the right all things. Why? Because that's what the process said. We were no longer thinking about value that we were delivering. We were thinking about these circumstantial things, that if we were to follow the process and check these things off, that magic happens. Software would appear. M&Ms come flying out of the sky, right? That sort of thing. So that's the efficiency side to this. That's one of the reasons we want to focus more on value in these different metrics to achieve better efficiency. Using circumstantial metrics as your main guide can lead to more overhead and more waste. Again, it's not bad to have these things, but we use them for the wrong reasons. And if it's our only guide, then our project becomes about meeting those circumstantial metrics. So that's the first piece from an efficiency side. The second one, sort of related, is vision. Is to think, are you aligned? Do we know what the business wants? Like it or not, our development teams are going to make assumptions. They're going to make decisions without everybody involved. It's a complex business, and they're going to do it. The best thing we can hope for is that they truly understand the needs of the customer, so that when they do make these assumptions, that they'll make them in the right direction. And this is key, right? We tried avoiding those assumptions as much as possible. We tried creating complex, detailed documents. But what we do is so complex that it is impossible, and we've seen that. So why not show them why we're doing this? Let's show them some metrics, some ways, so that they can understand what the value is and what it is that they're producing. I think of this like a sports team. In aligning a sports team, there's nothing better than that scoreboard, right? It shows you how much time is left, shows you the score, gives you all the data you need right now so to get that team aligned. A good cohesive team will quickly come around and they'll know what they need to do. They're going to have to make decisions, but based on the situation in the game, they're going to be able to find out what to do next. They're going to know, they'll automatically come together as a team and aligned in the right direction. If I were to point to circumstantial evidence for a sports team, I might point to something like a quarterback who's more focused on his quarterback score and his rating, or a receiver worried about his receptions or his fantasy football points or something like that. If those scores go up, you would assume that's good for the team, but it's circumstantial. It's not the real value. It's not direct. It doesn't mean they're going to win the game. It doesn't mean that they've won the game. It's the best move to make. And they would not be aligned. They'd be going in different directions. They wouldn't be playing as a team either. So focus on direct value gives us better vision as well. Using circumstantial metrics as your main guide can misalign the business and the delivery organization. We start doing things for the wrong reasons. And we start writing documents not because the business needs them, but because our process tells us to. So aligning people according to one vision is another real big reason for doing this. We work with different types of organizations, and one that I've worked with is an airline industry who was looking at revamping their baggage handling system. So this is a system that can track bags, bring them between connection. You find out when the biggest time for losing bags is between planes, connecting planes. So getting bags from one plane to another and then into conveyor belts and all that. And it was this whole project was to upgrade that whole system. And when I asked people, including on the product owner side, of why we're doing this, the typical answer that everybody had was, well, the old one's old. We need to upgrade it, right? It just needs to be updated. It's old. And that is what they were focused on. That was the vision. So they really didn't have any one reason to do it. They were just changing everything. So how do you know when you're done? Right? Just when you've changed all of it, when you've replaced the code, or what is guiding you here? And the reality is they didn't have really any vision because they didn't know why they were doing this. Seems simple enough. We're upgrading. But why? Why do we need to upgrade? And I remember them telling me that there's like full-time jobs at these different airports for people to go around and move bags around and do it, and that's one of the reasons. I'm like, okay, so is it to replace that job? Is it really to replace that job? And in this instance, you know, that person might be making what, $30,000, $40,000 a year to do that. How much is it costing you to build this system? And in this case, it was millions. Is that really the reason? Is to be more efficient that way, to not have to pay people to do all this work? Why? Why are we doing this? And then so then as you keep asking why, you start to get a little bit more to direct, right? So, well, we want to lose less bags. Well, why? What's wrong with losing bags? Well, we want our customers to be happy. Why? Why do you want your customers to be happy? And eventually it comes down to what we first defined values of, well, if they're happy, they're going to pay more. They're going to come back to us. They'll be repeat customers. They're not going to go to another competition. So ultimately it's market share, but improved customer satisfaction and revenue, right? That's probably the main reason. So when you dig down far enough, you get there. Now, you may still need to track some metrics like number of bags lost a week, but the other important thing is set yourself a goal. What is the goal? Is it to get to 0 bags a week lost? If it's 200 bags a week today that we're losing, what is the goal? And this is all a hypothesis. Do we know that if we got to a certain amount that we're going to get more revenue? We don't even know that. This is a hypothesis. So how do we even test this hypothesis? And many people won't know, but the more you have your team aligned, if your team really understands what the reason is, why we're doing this, they might have some great ideas on how to get there. How do we get a release out sooner to test this? How do we get from 200 to 180 now rather than wait till the whole thing is done? Maybe we have a minimum viable product sooner. And if you're looking for these sorts of ideas and things, then having those other types of metrics is key to get everybody aligned, getting them all on the same page, moving towards that one vision. And having a goal too, right? 0 is unrealistic. 0 bags a week is unrealistic. So what if you say 50? And then we can track that. How are we doing from 200 to 50 as we push it out? And the only way you're going to budget is to release. So it gets your team thinking about pushing things out as well. So this is essential from your product owner departments, from your product management side, and your teams to understand, why are we even doing these things? So that's the vision side. And then finally, it's incentive. There's a common paper out there, or actually it's a book, Measuring and Managing Performance in Organizations, but this is a commonly known fact that the moment you start putting incentives, specifically more extrinsic incentives like money or punishment, so we'll just refer to that as sticks and carrots and sticks, right? Carrots are incentives and sticks are punishment. The more you do that around any sort of measurement, then the more it gets affected, the more it goes the wrong way. So in this little thing, we're just attempting to show that, you know, as the measurement indicators might show one thing, but true performance will go the other way the moment you start to put incentives around that. And this is another very important thing to be aware of when dealing with metrics. And you know, and we've seen lots of companies go through this. Velocity is a very popular one. Once you start having people determine, we had one company where they had a PMO organization said, if any team varies by 20 plus or even or minus, but even plus 20% of their velocity every iteration, every sprint, then they would come to the PMO so we could have a conversation with them to help them. I put that in quotes, to help them. Now, they weren't doing it maliciously, but guess what started happening once they put that statement out there? Their velocity never varied more than 20%. And you could look at that and say, hey, look, it's working. People are getting in line now because of this policy. But the real reason was people just don't. This would look like more of a threat, right? of a stick punishment more than it did done more than it was for the right reasons. So the moment you start to put these sorts of things around the metrics, they will be suboptimal. This is a concept known as the perversion of metrics. And there's quite a few examples in history around this. There's one, I think this is from Canada. I'm from Canada, and in Alberta there's a lot of dinosaurs bones. Like it's one of the largest ones in the world, preserved dinosaur bones. And the story I heard here was they had put out, because they couldn't get enough people to find enough bones. So what they did is they just put a public announcement out there and said, for every bone that anyone brings in, we will give them a payment. We will give them a certain amount of money, and thinking that they'd get a lot more, and they did get a lot of bones. But what do you suppose happened? What a lot of them were doing is they would find these perfectly intact, nice, beautiful big bones, and then they'd just smash them. They'd smash them on the ground, break them into lots of different pieces of bones, and then bring them there. So that it actually had the opposite effect of what they were trying to produce. This is an example of that. There's another very popular one, I think it came from India, where they were trying to get rid of, they had a cobra problem, right? Lots of snakes. And they said, all right, for every dead snake you bring in, we will give you a bonus. We'll give you a payment for it. We'll give you incentive for that. And then what do you suppose started happening? Breeding farms of cobras started popping up all over the place. There were more cobras than they had ever had before because people were breeding them, killing them, and bringing them in every time. So this is just something to really be aware of when you're dealing with metrics. You must keep them value neutral. The term we're going to use is value neutral. Because do you want to be able to use the metrics so that you can determine, make a decision to move in a certain direction based on real data? The moment you start putting incentive on there, the moment you start putting people's livelihood at stake, then you can't trust those metrics anymore. This is a quote from that book. I kind of scaled it down a little bit. But once the measure of performance is made a target or incentive for the purpose of driving behavior, it loses the information content that qualifies it to play such a role. It just can't be used anymore the moment you do that. And if you looked at the left and the right metrics, I'm sure we don't have to go through them all. We have them in the next slide anyways. It is even more true of circumstantial metrics. So if I were to look even at the pizza one, if you look at the left, think about those, right? If we started giving bonuses based on orders per driver, and that's how they were being, that's how the orders would work. You could probably guess at what sorts of things could start happening. Right? Maybe they wait too long in order to go for a drive, and then they speed like crazy once they're up there, because they're going to try to get as many in one per, right? Or drivers would be taking ones from other people. They'd be doing all sorts of things, and employee satisfaction would go down. If for any one of these, you could probably show how it could be changed and created and made suboptimal. Whereas the ones on the right probably could be gamed, anyone could be, but probably a lot harder to game. And that's one of the key things here. So that's where we are with metrics, and those are the main things we're trying to do of why we're trying to capture these things and why we're trying to use measurements. Those three main things. You use the term value neutral. Can you clarify again, what does value neutral mean? Meaning it shouldn't be used for incentives, reward or punishment, or what does value neutral really mean? Yeah, so when you keep things value neutral, what you're trying to do is it by itself is not not what's measuring value. It can't be based on any one number. So by saying it's value neutral, velocity is the perfect example, right? I want velocity to be a true measure of what's happening. So if my technical debt is going up, then what should happen to velocity? I want to see it should go down, and it should have a reason. And if there's no incentives around it, then we have more transparency, and we can have a real conversation about, hey, why did this go down? Oh, it's because of technical debt. Well, what should we do about it? And then we have a real conversation about it. Or maybe it's not technical. Maybe it's because one of our people were out on vacation for a week, and we should be able to say that. We should have the real conversations around it. Once you start putting people's livelihoods around it and putting incentives around it, it no longer becomes value neutral. It is a false sense of value. When a velocity metric goes down, we'll try to change it. We'll start doing things like trying to put points on every little bit of work that we do. Or I've seen teams create cards, story cards for vacation for people, for technical debt items, for bugs, and you could argue one way or another with those, or meetings that they have. They start creating cards around these. Why? That goes to the first point of efficiency. We spend so much time doing these sorts of things because we think that we have to show a certain consistent velocity all the time because there's a false sense of value around it. It's not value neutral. But I expect that if somebody goes on vacation, our velocity goes down. And we have a conversation of why. We don't get our hands slapped because it went down. We don't lose our bonuses because of that. So that's kind of what we mean by that, by value neutral. Does that make sense? Yeah. So circumstantial has more an effect on that. And the question also becomes, then who tracks these things? Who is it? Who on the business side and who on the team come up with these and track them? Now, I can buy the fact that in a pizza shop, it might be okay for these not to be brought all the way back and forth, right? Maybe it might be just as efficient for my drivers not to worry about any of those value metrics because I can hire them, I can get them up to speed and running pretty quickly. I don't need them to work as a team. That's possible in certain organizations. I can buy that. Like, why is it so important for them to know what the direct value metrics are? Don't worry about it. You just focus on your job, right? I can sort of see that. There's a case there that you can make to say, why even bother blending these two? Let's just keep them separate. But what about software? When we go back to software, why is it different? And this comes back to the same reason we're doing Agile, and Agile's taken off so much. And software is a different game. It is more creative. It relies on team. It needs teams. You need the individuals as a team are more powerful than the sum of the individuals. And this is a key concept. This is why we use Scrum. This is why Agile has gotten so big, is that what we build is complex, very difficult. And we need them to make decisions because there isn't one manager, there isn't one document that can describe what the customer needs. There's not a customer that can. So how do you build that? You do it in an empirical way by looking at the evidence, by looking at the data, and let that guide you, just like sales and marketing people do, just like weather forecasters do. That's what we're doing. What we're trying to do is give them guides other than those circumstantial ones. The things on the left are great metrics, but they need to be value neutral. These need to be for teams to actually measure. On teams, I love things like code coverage. I love having code coverage. Why? Because it tells me where my tests are lacking. Maybe I missed something, or maybe there's a bit of code that we don't need. And that's why we don't have a test around it. So let's get rid of it. But the moment we put value on there, the moment a manager tells me that we need to get 90% code coverage, then I can get you to 90%. That's not hard. But what value would it really have? It's no longer value neutral. So the teams are going to keep track of the things on the left anyways. They should. I don't want you to think out of this talk that we shouldn't be measuring the things on the left at all. These are very important as operational data and metrics that we're going to use along the way. But if the business doesn't provide anything else, and the business wants to know how we're doing and they're asking the team how they're doing, then they shouldn't be surprised if the team gives them measurements like velocity and number of tests passing and all that stuff, because that's what they're tracking, and they should. So I'm going to put a lot of this on the business, on product owners if you have them, on managers. What are the metrics? What are the metrics that are more direct, that have much more accurate reflection of value delivered? You should bring those to the team, not the other way around. It's a lazy way out to just take what they're already measuring and then use that against them and incent them on that. Focus on, you come up with the ones on the right, bring those to the team. And that's kind of what one of the main pieces are. And they're going to be different every time, right? So if you think about this, this is Scrum. This is just an example of some Agile development using Scrum. What happens is, as teams are working around, they come up with impediments, and the ones that they can't get through themselves, that are organizational in nature, organizational impediments, they send those to management. And management's job is to then invest, make investments, have the organization invest into fixing those impediments or improving on these things. That could be training, it could be coaching, or infrastructure tools, facilities, whatever it is, to help the teams build stuff. So they're in there, they're doing these things, they're investing on it, but how do they know these investments are making a difference? You can get all your people Scrum Master certified, and you can put all these, buy them the latest and greatest tools that are out there, and you're putting a lot of money into this. But how do you know you're getting a return on that investment? This is a key piece that we're trying to get out of this, is that in software development, what we're trying to do is measure this. And this is yet another reason for it, is how do we know these investments are making a difference? And that's what gets us to this evidence-based medicine piece. Is in medicine for years, what was happening was doctors, very skilled doctors, were relying on their experience and, frankly, their gut to make diagnoses, to put treatments together for their patients. And, you know, majority of that was good, but once in a while, big mistakes were made because they weren't really looking at the data as well as they could be. And then that's when this idea of evidence-based medicine came into play, where you can look into it a little more on Wikipedia. I'm not going to go through all these steps, but effectively it was talking about, here's a problem, what is all the best evidence that we have right now in our industry, and let's appraise it. Let's actually apply practices and then reevaluate those same pieces of evidence right away. And they talk about circumstantial and direct evidence, just like in law, circumstantial evidence versus direct evidence. And those principles are what we're doing, what we're bringing to software with evidence-based management. More specifically, this is Ken Schwaber, the creator of Scrum, has been doing a lot of research into this, and he's categorized these things into these three categories: current value, time to market, and ability to innovate. You can find more on ebmgt.org, so that's evidence-based-management.org, it's through scrum.org. But you can take these concepts yourselves and apply them. You don't need this tool. It's more of an idea than anything else. And basically, these are the three types. So honestly, the way they started was they came up with a bunch of different metrics and then categorized in these three ways. So value, which is the revenue ones like we've already been talking about, and satisfaction, customer employee satisfaction. Time to market, cycle time, time from request to actual production, and then things like how often you can actually release, because the only way to deliver value is to release. And then innovation on the right-hand side as well, the ability to innovate. So like too many defects, if you're worried about those and maintaining those, then you're not going to be able to innovate as much. Bigger majority of your budget will be going to maintenance. And how they're using the system and what version they're working on as well is another key one. Are they all what percentage of your people are on the latest version of it? So this is evidence-based management, and they use it as a guide. It's that simple, is that we do a measurement, we go to work for a few months, and then we remeasure. We keep doing that over and over again. The circumstantial evidence will let us guide our work, but then we make improvements. Then we do the direct evidence again. We remeasure. These are a little bit more lagging, so you don't have to do them as often. It's a lot of overhead to do them all the time. But then you do a diagnosis, and then you change the way you work. And this is how we bring agility to big organizations now. This is how we do enterprise adoption. We show them the metrics. We first start with baselining what metrics that they want to measure. When we're talking to a C-level executive, this is what they care about. They don't care so much about, they'd laugh at us if we start explaining what velocity was. What is it that we're trying to bring to their department, to their organization? And that's what this does. So how do you track them? I'm going to show you a few just different examples that are real ones that we use. This is kind of, if you look on this little legend, these are 4 different reviews that were done over time. And you can sort of see that the closer it is to the middle, the better it is. And there's more detail around these. But this is just one example using this radar graph, where the first review showed that the installed version X was very bad, which means a very small percentage were actually on the latest release. So that stood out. So they were able to make some changes to that pretty quickly and get it down in the later reviews. You've got things like total number of defects were pretty high, and then that got pushed down. And this can show over time as these things get smaller and smaller and closer to the center, the better we're doing. So you can do it that way.
Can you clarify the nomenclature of the chart appears like closer to the periphery is best, in the middle is better, and at the center is just good. So being out of the... Oh,
okay. Yeah. I guess the ones I've used it was the opposite. But you can get them to do it different ways, right, with Excel. Yeah. So actually the one I use is showing the one in the middle is the best. But yeah, I guess this is the other way around, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I didn't see it said good, better, best up there. So yeah, the last one, I suppose, innovation rate got best in there. But the first one, I guess they got more different releases out, or I don't know how that works. But anyways, you can sort of see how this can help over time, right? And and there are tools and stuff that are used for this. And then things as simple as a CFD, right? Cumulative flow diagram, found a lot more in Lean, but in Kanban. But yeah, I've done this with Scrum teams too, right? It doesn't change anything. Is it measures cycle time and lead time? This is like more real data that they can use to see where they are. Lead time getting shorter and shorter over time. You can show that with a diagram like this, and so you can measure how much time it takes for its production ready versus, and there's a gap between cycle time and lead time. Lead time is when it actually gets to the customer. That's a big problem. Let's try to shorten that. You can see it does over time. Right? Time goes left to right as things are getting added. And then, even things like this. This is a release plan burn up that's showing velocity going up and up and up. The first few sprints were pretty horrible, but like in a lot of ones. And you've got scope at the very top, and then we've also outlined some releases that we've made in this product along the way. So like this was probably like for the year 2013, what we were trying to achieve, how much work we wanted to do, how many releases we were going to do. This is a very common one, but again, it's only showing velocity and amount of work produced, which is okay, but it's not a measure of value. So why not take this thing when you show it to your customers, your stakeholders, your executives, your whoever, and then overlay things, and your teams as well. Overlay stuff. Here's how sales went. See how sales started. It's a little bit lagging, but it was kind of flat, and then a few months after the first release, it went up, and we were only measuring it every few sprints, not every single sprint, and it went way up here. Maybe employee satisfaction. So you sort of started going up once you started releasing, but at a certain point, it dropped. Why? Having that discussion is key. We don't just assume it's going to go up because these things are going up. Velocity jumped, and so did an employee satisfaction dipped. What could have gone on there? What maybe the work-life balance wasn't the best, but let's have those conversations. Let's try to incorporate them in the regular reviews you're doing anyways. This is what that means. So, just kind of to finish it off here is that out of all of this, what we're hoping for is to show that using these metrics, using these measurements, understanding what value is, takes it out of IT. Scrum isn't just for IT. Agility isn't just for IT. Agility can provide the business with a true competitive advantage here. If you're measuring and showing what our guides are, and they're based on real business things, imagine what we can do. We can now explain what we're doing a little bit better. We're not going to talk about crazy meetings where we stand up for 15 minutes with our executives. We're not going to talk about story points and user stories and acceptance criteria. They don't care about that, or velocity. They care about these other things. This is what we're trying to do. It's a complex world. We're trying to be more efficient. That's the first one. We're trying to get everybody aligned on the vision, create more vision. And then finally, we're trying to do this without creating suboptimal metrics, true metrics, so they're not, incentives aren't going in the wrong way. The right measurements are essential for this, so they can improve communication, productivity, and business alignment. And that's what this is really about. And that's kind of all I have for this. Like I said, I'd be happy. We're going to have some questions here. I think we still have a few minutes, but I'd be happy to talk about this some more if you ever wanted to reach out to me, look at some more examples. But something that I'm passionate about, and I think you're going to see a lot more around in the coming months and years as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. That's excellent. So, to the audience, you guys, I have a bunch of questions already that you have, but feel free to add more questions. We'll leave a few minutes to take those questions. In the meantime, Don, if you can advance the slides while I'm getting more questions in, I'll quickly introduce Synergip. If you can go to the next page. This is a short, in a nutshell, you can build this slide out, quick introduction to Synergip. We are a software development partner, typically for small to mid-sized technology companies. And for every client, we put together a dedicated team and help them deliver with a lower cost and a lower risk because of the agile practices. We have a development center in India and teams in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Francisco Bay Area. And we allow our clients to convert the team that is working for them at Synergip into a captive team, so they have the long-term flexibility also. So that's kind of Synergip in a nutshell. We've been doing these webinars for many years now. And Don, if you don't mind just advancing to next page, this is a quick glimpse of some of our customers. And now let's kind of start taking some questions that we have remaining few minutes. And so first question, what maybe we're taking is around this challenge companies have of choosing metrics for team versus individual. This thought process that you walked us through of circumstantial versus direct metrics, any advice how they apply to team level versus individual? Don?
Yeah, this is always a very touchy one because it does really rely on teams and not individuals, right? And direct evidence would rely more on outcomes. And I guess to me it would be circumstantial to say, well, we're going to measure each individual to make sure that they're pulling their weight. Is it true that everybody needs to be pulling the same weight on the team? Is it true that putting pressure on the others to increase is going to help the team and help the organization? And I think that's where I'd start. In a more team-based situation, it's probably going to be wrong, right? You're going to have people that work 10 times more than others, and that's just the natural way of teams. Others will pull each other up. They'll learn. They'll get better over time. But it's essential to give them that trust, and it's more about working in a complex environment than it is about anything else. We can't manage like we did before. But also, I think empowering the teams, giving them the data that they need, but they know. The teams themselves know. And if they're focused on the real direct evidence, the real metrics, and they need to make changes in order to achieve them and get there better, they need to be empowered to hold each other in check a little bit more. I think management style should be to give them the data that they can use for that, but not to enforce it. Because as soon as you do, then we go back to carrots and sticks again, right? So it is very touchy. And usually my answer there is let the team figure it out. And I've had numerous teams. I've been on a team member on a team where people weren't pulling their weight, and we let people know, and we put the right things in place to actually make some changes. And that's what we want to see more. And if your team's not doing that, it's not a sign that you should go start measuring it. It's a sign that, hey, why aren't they doing that? What can we do with our team to make them feel more empowered to do these sorts of things? Yeah. How can we make some changes? And that's kind of where I go with it. In general, I find that individual measurements are extremely circumstantial.
Right, right. Let's take a related question, a little more specific related question to this topic. So there's a question around that that they have teams that are constantly having challenge of completing what they commit in a sprint. So we have been requested to provide sprint metrics of hours committed versus completed, blocked, and so on. So these teams struggle with these metrics and providing the right interpretation or meaning to them. So what would you recommend when this situation happens?
So they're being asked to provide these metrics?
Yeah, because I guess the high-level business says, you know, these teams are consistently missing, I guess, the scope.
Yeah. Right. So I guess in that case, if they're constantly missing, it can't be seen as a failure, right? That they need to be able to learn from it. Why did this happen? What can we do to avoid it? They should get action items out of that they can actually apply and involve management into it, rather than just saying we're going to now measure this to keep you on check. I guess it's sort of the same answer that I gave before, right? This is probably where I'd head with this is education of management. But I guess if you're on the ground, the best thing I could do is say start asking for other metrics. In the meantime, track what they're asking for, because I know what it's like being out there, and it's not like an overnight thing saying, hey, watch this webinar, and now we're no longer going to do this stuff.
Right.
I find myself doing it anyways, but then attaching the better metrics along the end. Say, look, I know we didn't make our so-called commitment, I'm going to put in quotes, but this is a complex world. This isn't a commitment, it's more of a forecast. And we missed forecast, we should adjust. We shouldn't forecast the same way afterwards.
Right.
So those are but I'd still give them the data, only because I just realized it. But I try to give them other data on top of that, right? Let's give them. We missed the so-called commitment, but look what we've done from a value perspective. Right. Look how quickly we got something to market. When was the last time we did that, right? And so start showing them that stuff. A lot of times the problem is middle management, right? Because their job is to put together circumstantial metrics. The executives see direct evidence all the time. That's why these projects got funded. And then the people on the ground are looking at the very kind of metrics that are going to help them: code coverage, code complexity, tests, and all that stuff. And then the people in the middle are looking for their metrics, and that's where things get confusing.
Okay. Well, let's take one final question in the interest of time, and of course, audience are welcome to reach out to Don for any further questions. But you brought in this very interesting framework and thought process around evidence-based management here. Any examples of companies who are applying that to software and doing a good job that someone can look up and read some case studies around applying this way of thinking?
Yeah,
metrics?
I don't know how many have been cataloged in that way, but I know we've been doing it quite a bit. And we've tried selling it as a product, and I know with the Scrum.org people we have as well, like seeing it as this is a thing, because there's a tool and stuff that can help with the metrics. But where we've all been the most successful is using it as an approach for Agile adoption. It is giving us so much better traction in adopting Agile in an organization than it did before. So I'm working with big company now in Houston, and we're using this where what we're trying to do is put metrics together that the C-level people care about. And then we're going to use that as a guide to see what practices should we put in place. Rather than just saying we're going to sheep dip everybody in Agile, give them training, and away we go, what we'd much rather do is give them metrics that we can show them that can guide our practices along the way. And so what we do is basically we want to have a team of leaders evaluating these metrics, figuring out what practices to do next, implement them for the next few months using kind of like a Scrum-based approach, re-evaluating the metrics, seeing what's changed and where they need to focus next. In a way, they're applying Scrum at the organizational level. There's a team that meets regularly. They pull practices into their They have a backlog of practices. They pull them into their so-called sprint. They do them, and then they measure the actual value of the metrics. But it's at a leadership level, at an organizational level, that applies throughout, right? HR departments hiring Agile people, putting together little lunch and learn sessions or trainings, putting people through training. All these sorts of things are the decisions that they're making for Agile adoption, and they're using EBM as an approach to that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Don, for today's session. This is a great topic and a lot to chew on this new thought process around evidence-based management and applying those metrics. So, folks, thank you for attending today's session. Look out for next one. Just as a reminder, this end of this month is the big Agile conference. So we will do a roadshow around top 10 Agile takeaways next month. So we will skip the webinar format, but we'll have another one the following month.
And I'll be at that conference too if anyone else is there and wants to chat more about this.
Absolutely, yeah. Both Don and I will be there at the Agile conference in Orlando end of this month.